You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi, hosted by two teachers who break down a different Propagandhi song each episode. And today we are talking about Showdown-Greenest Eyes, Preamble, track 4 from the first full-length LP, How to Clean Everything. I'm Greg.
I am Keith.
And we are here today to talk about a song, Keith, on the How to Clean Everything full-length, which was released on May 31st, 1993, 27 years ago, which is crazy. So this album came out when I was about 9.5 years old. What about you?
Same.
Nice. When's your birthday, by the way? I'm November 1983.
March 8th, 1984.
Oh, right on. Okay. So this record came out in Fat Records, and it's one of the oldest Fat Rec releases. If you're curious about the history of this particular record and its recording, Chris Hanna, the vocalist and guitar player of Propagandhi, told the entire history of the How to Clean Everything on his podcast, The Catastrophic Break from Consensus Reality. He talked about it in great detail on his episode about Haile Selassie. He released that episode number 2 of his podcast in November of 2018. And it's like an hour and a half of How to Clean Everything trivia. Keith, did you listen to the Haile Selassie episode?
I did.
What'd you think
I really liked the reflection and introspection and willingness to go back and not just parse and apologize for ideas and missteps, but to break them down, to explain them, and to say that like why, what they were now uncomfortable with or what they regret. And that kind of just brought a maturity to an album that I don't love.
Okay. Well, Keith, I know you did a little bit of research about this record. What did you find out about How to Clean Everything during your digging into this record that you have overlooked and not really listened to all that much in your years of loving Propagandhi? What did you find out about How to Clean Everything?
So this is Propagandhi's best-selling album. Chris Hanna said that in an interview with Vice, and I think part of that, you have a big audience early on, and maybe not saying everything that you wanted to, or not saying everything that you wanted to the right way, and then kind of losing some of that crowd intentionally, which we'll talk about later, but perhaps unintentionally as music styles are changing, the punk explosion, right, kind of expands, but also in a way implodes once new metal comes around. But I found a couple quotes from Fat Mike, one in which he said, like, this album defined the Fat West Coast sound, almost. Politically, it said everything that a lot of us wanted to say, which I mean, it's easy to say that they're a smarter band than NoFX.
Mm-hmm.
And he even said, ranking it in his top 5 of Fat Record releases of all time.
Wow.
He said everything about it is great. Every song, every lyric, every chord. That's what he said about this record. But I also, thinking about that, like as either a fan or as someone who's unwilling to admit flaws, unwilling to look back with like a critical lens, which you and I are definitely going to do today.
Well, and I know that there's a re-release and a remaster from the original analog tapes that came out in 2013. And if you buy the digital version on Bandcamp, there's like 19 tracks, including several bonus tracks, and some demo versions as well, which is really interesting. If you buy it on vinyl, there's 15 songs, so there's more on the vinyl re-release than there was on the original copy as well. When did you get How to Clean Everything?
Oh, I bought this. This is the second album I got. So I started with Today's Empires, and I bought this afterwards. I remember being in my apocryphal Propagandhi superfan origin story, standing in Best Buy, a college freshman with How to Clean Everything and Today's Empires, and really not knowing which one to get. Those are the two they had, and going with Empires just because I like the art more,
Mm.
and it was a newer release. So I just thought like, yeah, maybe they're better over time. And when I went back and bought this later, I didn't know anything about the band. I thought it was a different singer. I was like, wait a second, this is so different musically. So this is not a band that I was listening to when this came out. You know, like the people who really connected to this, I was listening to my parents' Brooks and Dunn's tapes, or
Sure.
you know, Crisscross and maybe Green Day or something, but
Yeah,
definitely not like legit good punk. So it kind of doesn't have that same either pivotal moment in my musical trajectory or that emotional connection. It's an album that I went back on and went back to find, and as a result, didn't care for as much. How about you? When did you hear this?
Well, I mean, in the origin story, this is the first record that I ever heard from Propagandhi. And so, as you remember from episode 1, I may or may not have stolen this record. I cannot really recall. However, this is my least favorite Propagandhi record. I know that so many people say that this record is their favorite to this day. Every now and then I'll still see a How to Clean Everything shirt at shows or on the street. But, you know, today we're talking about a song called Showdown. And it also has a subtitle in parentheses that says GEP, which stands for Greenest Eyes and Preamble. And so this is track 4 on the record. And Keith, we have a guest who, whenever I reached out to possible guests, identified this as one of his most influential Propagandhi songs. And the guest that I'm going to bring on in a moment is my longtime friend, Brian Phee. Brian used to play in the Hopeless Records band Break the Silence. He played guitar, and the other guitar player in the band was Dan Precision, who is famously of 88 Fingers Louie, and also played guitar on Rise Against the Unraveling, and owns the Bomb Shelter Studio in Chicago. Brian was also in the band All Else Fails, and he was also in the band Counterpunch for a long time as well. And I think he played on at least a couple of Counterpunch records as well. So we're going to talk about Showdown with Brian, and we're going to also talk about his love of Propagandhi. So should we go ahead and bring on Brian?
Let's hear what he has to say.
All right.
During these times where we're kind of like fight or flight, it hasn't been ever so evident that like we have to learn how to survive again. And I feel like as animals that use cognitive thinking, we reason outside of reason. Now we're going back to like basic instincts, you know, and like I'm hearing things that I've never heard before. I'm tasting things I've never tasted. I'm watching the same movies that I've seen 1,000 times, you know, and I'm seeing expressions I've never seen on people's faces or just like the diction and stuff. So being able to go back and go to the original Propagandhi album that I was, you know, introduced to was kind of a pleasure to do that because so many emotions came out that maybe I took for granted, you know.
That's so interesting, and that's something that we are trying to do as well. Like we're trying to, every time we talk about a different song, we're trying to hear it in new ways as well, to hear it with a fresh ear, to go into a little more depth, like things that we skip over for years and years and we don't really know why. We're just like, skip. So I'm glad that you're experimenting as well with like revisiting the things that either have brought you joy for many years or seeing them with new eyes. I mean, that's just wonderful.
I don't think it was intentional either. I think it's just one of those things where it was an instinct to like the human instinct to like survive again. You know, we've been on autopilot for so long doing whatever jobs we've been doing or whatever, you know, hobbies, anything we enjoy, but you get to a point where, you know, instinct just it's different, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, Brian,
cool.
So Brian, I want to introduce you a little bit.
Okay.
For all of our audience. So Brian Phee, formerly of Break the Silence, All Else Fails, and Counterpunch. Tell us a little bit about yourself for just a second.
I'm like most Chicago musicians. I'm over 40. So many things I'm so proud to have done, and so many things I wish I had done. But yeah, music. Being 41 this year, it was really cool to grow up in the Chicago music scene, having the stalwarts of, Slapstick, Alkaline Trio, Apocalypse Hoboken, Oblivion, and that's just like the
Got my
small.
Lawrence Arms shirt here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's just so many great bands that came out of Chicago and then became other bands. So we definitely had enough at our fingertips, So.
Well, when I was waiting for you to jump on the line, I was watching the All Else Fails reunion show from 2016 that Andy put on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I was like, that opener 17 came on, and I was like, this is great. And so it's just like a nostalgic trip for me, seeing you guys perform that song for years in two bands.
Oh yeah, no, I actually wish we had done that a few years later, because I think mentally I would have been in a better place, just being able to appreciate it more. And I think at that point it was like, oh yeah, cool. But now I'd be like, oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, nice. Well, Brian, you're a musician to me, and we've hung out like socially a bunch of times over the years as well. And you're a musician to me that transcends genre. Like you appreciate, like you're a genre bender as far as your musical tastes. And in Break the Silence, I mean, you guys were like super heavy and like had tons of metal influences and great riffs, but then you also had a super melodic side with Counterpunch as well. And to me, having you on the show to talk about Propagandhi is like really a nice balance, because you kind of live within both of the worlds that Propagandhi have lived in with as well, with all of their sounds and transitions over the years. How did you first discover Propagandhi, really quick, before we dive into the song Showdown?
The quickest way to explain it was just living in Chicago. You go to shows. It didn't matter who played the show. You just went. So it's like Thursday through Sunday, and you had the Fireside. You had Elmhurst VFW, and those were like the main two that you go to. So Elmhurst VFW, you'd skate in the parking lot. The girls would watch, and you'd pop a tape in your cassette player, like in your car. I was the older one of most of my friends that skated, so I was the designated driver, and everybody hopped in my 1988 Mustang, and people would, I'd go pick up my buddy Jason, my buddy Brandon, my buddy John, then a few of the girls, and then it'd be like, well, for this example, Brandon was like, oh, you got to check out this band. I think I was 16 or maybe I just turned 17, and he popped it in, and it was How to Clean Everything, and I was like, oh man, that's gnarly, like that's awesome. And I just fell in love with it. I mean, the band that I was really stuck on right before that was Apocalypse Hoboken. So I kind of liked that. I liked the graveliness, the gravel, that Chris has, but I like melody. I grew up as a 80s hair metal fan. So that's just like choir, So to hear Chris have that like emotion, that growl, that grovel, but also like hit those notes like no one else. And then to learn that he's doing it while playing guitar, and then trying to do that as a guitar player myself, just the respect went, through the roof.
When you discovered the band, had you already been playing guitar for a while yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I learned when I was younger, acoustic guitar, you play in church or something like that, like 12 chords. But I revisited the idea of, hey, you know what, maybe I could do this. When I was like 14 or 15, took a few lessons, and actually the guy who was teaching me his name was George Bayless, and he was one of the guitar players for UFO, actually. And he kind of told me, he's like, look, I don't want to waste your time, so you let me know what you want to get out of this. And it's a 45-minute lesson. I was like, well, I want to learn the bands, like these bands like Apocalypse Hoboken, Propagandhi, Green Day, whatever it is. I want to learn how to play their songs. And he goes, okay, well, I got a deal for you. We spend 25 minutes of me teaching you the songs, and then we spend the rest of the time, I'm going to tell you what those parts of the songs are, whether it's an arpeggio or, what scale, what key it's in, stuff like that. And that way it made sense. Like it related to the song, but it was like he was totally selling me on an idea that I didn't realize was so genius until, 20 years later. I'm like, he got me to play the songs that I love and taught me something while doing it, basically music theory. So that's basically how I got back into guitar. And then he's like, you're pretty much good, go on your own, or, really, really study and become like amazing. And I was like, I'm lazy. I'm going to do it on my own.
Did you feel like How to Clean Everything grabbed you fully into Propagandhi as a fan, or did it take until any of their later records? Like, or did that one really just draw you in right away?
No, I was a fan like immediately. I I sported every single shirt through, the whole wearing double XLs, while you're skating and stuff.
Yeah.
Buying the How to Clean Everything shirt, going to your local record store and like, hey man, do you have a Today's Empire shirt, or is anything coming out when the album comes out? Stuff like that, like making friends with the local shops and making sure that you got in on any special merchandise and stuff. So yeah, they were one of them.
As like a longtime touring musician, do you have any like Propagandhi stories from like the road or like seeing them that really stand out to you or anything like that?
Two in particular. One really just short story. It was just getting to see Propagandhi with J Church. I can't remember who else played that show, but it was at Congress Theater in Chicago, and I actually went with Andy, former All Else Fails and Counterpunch singer and guitar player, and we just stood in front, literally like our chins on the stage like that, and just gawking like we were like little boys like gawking at a girl watching Chris. And that was during his Mesa Triaxis era, and he was just ripping, shredding. That was Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes tour. And me and Andy just look at each other and we're like, we're gonna go burn our equipment now. Well, there's no way we could ever be that good. And I remember Chris breaking a string on the last song, and I'm forgetting the name of it, but I believe it's the last song on Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes, with the solo.
Hall of Fame. Yeah, Purina Hall of Fame.
And he broke a string at the beginning of that solo, and he still like played it.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, wait, how? Like, I just laughed the whole time. So that was one cool thing to see. As like an aspiring musician, you're looking at a band and a musician that might not be a household name, but to me, I was like astonished that he's not, because he is that good of a musician. So that was one of the stories.
Nice. Do you have another one you said too?
The other one, it just a really quick little story, but I was fortunate enough to play with Break the Silence at South by Southwest. Avenged Sevenfold backed out, Hopeless hit us up, and they were like, hey, we're interested in possibly signing you. You guys want to come down, and we'll take care of all expenses, and you'll play a show. And if we like you and we sign you from the show, cool. If someone else signs you, we're going to ask to be reimbursed for your stuff. If no one signs you and we don't like you, then you had a good trip.
Nice.
Sweet. So the day before our show, or night before our show, was the Rock Against Bush show tour. But right before that show, was an 1 hour like pre-party put on by Fat Records, and Fat Mike was footing the bill for all the drinks for for 1 hour only. So we go there. I have some passes and stuff. Got a few friends, family members in too, and we're just walking around, hanging out with just every person that we've ever idolized. And I remember walking around with Dan Precision, who was in Break the Silence with me, and looking around, and Chris like comes walking over, and of course Chris, being the nicest guy ever, he's like, oh, hi Dan, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I'm standing right next to Dan holding probably 3 drinks. I'm gonna say it was 2, but Fat Mike was footing the bill, so I was going up and getting as many as possible, because that's the only way I'm ever going to be a part of Fat Records, is by drinking their money, something like that. And I just remember just standing there and listening to Chris talk to Dan and talk about old stories and stuff, and I couldn't even tell you what the stories were about. I was just literally, again, staring at him like I was like a 12-year-old boy looking at a girl that he could never have.
Well, sure. And like, yeah, I mean, these are 2 guitar icons that are standing with you as well. You probably grew up idolizing the entire time. Then you're in a band with one of them. I mean, it's got to be just such a cool experience.
Oh, for sure. And Chris, I think this was the best part about the story for me, was just seeing how humble of a person he is, how gentle of a soul it seemed like he has. And that made his music mean even more to me, because every grovel, every scream, every word meant more, because it felt like he transitioned into singing band mode, and he felt what he was saying. And when he talked to you, it was just like, oh, hey, so nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. I was like, wait, you care?
Yeah.
So that's what was really cool about it. I was just like, I took something away from that, and I will never forget it. And that's something that, he hopefully he knows that he's that kind of person. And if he doesn't, hopefully he sees this and now knows.
Nice. Well, and I interviewed him in a stairwell in the back of a music venue in Saskatoon in like 2009. And we just had this such a nice conversation. And, I was just like this, 28-year-old guy interviewing him about supporting cast. And it was just the kindest, gentlest person. So I'm with you on that 100%. So Brian, when I reached out to you to talk to you about this project that Keith and I are doing, I asked you to tell me some of your favorite songs of the band's era. And the episode that Keith and I are talking about on this episode is the song Showdown, which is track 4 from How to Clean Everything. And I really want to know what it is about this song in particular that caused you to list this among your all-time most influential Propagandhi songs.
Probably 2 or 3 different reasons, and they're pretty basic. And then, the details, are there. But yeah, first, part of the name GEP. I've heard different stories about what the song is about and what the title of the song is about. I don't know what to be factual or not, but I was able to take something from it. One is Green Eyes, and I forgot what piece stood for.
Preamble.
Yes, Preamble. So and Green Eyes was John, and Preamble was Chris. Again, I've never fact checked this or anything like that, but I've heard that it was kind of like Showdown was like whose lyrics are going to be better, which one's going to fit better. But they also had a similar story to be told from totally different eyes, different stance in life. It's kind of like someone who would say, we went down 2 different paths in life, but somehow we're living in the same house together, like a husband and wife. Like it's those details that what you've gone through, but you've basically gone through the same thing. It's just, a different story along the way. And I feel like that's what Showdown is about. That's the base.
Is there anything about the music, not the lyrics, but like the music and the riffs and the performance that, latch on to you as a musician?
I've always liked production. I've always liked thickness, heaviness, the 80s metal with that like really like clean vocals or gruff vocals, but hitting notes and things like that. And I felt like this song had it all, especially after, you start off with Anti-Manifesto and then it just like blasts you through, 2 other songs and you're like, okay, they could do this. They got multiple singers. They got totally different ends of the spectrum, lyric wise and stuff. And then you get to Showdown and it's like, okay, you're kind of slowing it down a little bit. You're giving me some thickness. You're giving me some gruffness. You're giving me John on vocals as well. And you're also slowing it down where I could start as like a 16, 17-year-old, I could start to figure out what those like phrasings are on the guitar. Because most bands have a style. That song fits within their style. It was just slowed down enough for me to really like grasp it. And then I don't know if that was my first attachment, but looking back from now to then, I would say that would have been my attachment. It was being able to dissect it a little bit easier.
Nice. So did you ever learn how to play this song in particular when you were learning the guitar?
Oh yeah. I'm sure every band that I've ever been in got sick of hearing it. Cause I was just like, and they're just like, okay, we know, how to play
Sound check.
So yeah.
Sound check every night.
Exactly.
How do you feel about the John era of the band? So Keith and I talk about different eras on the show every week, and this week is a song from the John K. Samson era of the first 2 full-length records. How do you feel about the John era in general as opposed to the other 5 records?
I feel like it had its place in time. I know Chris is not like the biggest fan of that record. I don't know if it's the production. I know they still play the songs and he enjoys it, but I feel like they're a band that has a specific style, but they've also changed. and no style that they played has ever been wrong. I feel like some bands you could be like, okay, 2005 to 2008, you don't listen to that stuff. Like it's just wrong. It doesn't work. But I feel like each lineup also, like, it just made sense. And that just shows what kind of intelligence those guys have. And the people that surround Chris, or Chris surrounds himself with, they're not idiots on a probably musical and like an intellectual level. So I think that's why they were able to achieve that.
Did you ever follow the rest of John's work after he left and formed the Weaker Thans?
to be completely honest, I tried. I just never really cared for what I heard, but I can respect what they did, and I think they were a good band for people who enjoyed that style.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing
Yeah.
is, like, a lot of people say that the Weaker Thans are their absolute favorite band ever. They are many, many, many people's favorite band. So I think that this was a super important split for John
Mm-hmm.
and Chris. I think that that was like supposed to happen. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you could say that about so many bands, like when they either break up or one guy leaves, and you're like, well, that wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have this, lucrative career, financially, musically, emotionally, if he had not left or something. If the other person didn't push him out. But actually, I'm not even sure how the split happened. I never looked into that.
Well, that's definitely, Chris tells the story on his Catastrophic Break from Consensus Reality podcast, which is on Patreon.
Yeah.
So if anybody's out there curious about the Chris and John split story, you should go support Chris's work over what he's doing on his own podcast, which is spectacular. And Keith and I both love it very, very much. Brian, is there anything else that you wanted to say about Showdown, GEP, while we have you on the show today?
I'm just very grateful that kid, old friend of mine, pops that tape into my, tape deck in my car. I'm really glad that song stuck with me for all these years. It's a song that definitely made me want to play guitar and play guitar more, and got me better, because I was able to dissect some of those things and relate some of the time signatures or riffs and stuff like that, and say, oh wow, that was an arpeggio, or this was this. Like it made it fun. And some of the other stuff that they play, just based on my age, my talent level at the time, I'm just very appreciative to have had that. And there's a really strong message that I take from it, and I think it's very topical also nowadays too. Just like, keeping your mouth shut, and unless you want to open your mouth, but then we're gonna say you have freedom until we take it away. And that's something that's kind of weird now, because we're using all these social platforms to like podcasts and like Facebook, Instagram, to tell our stories and get information. And I feel like even as of like a few days ago, we're being told that, like, hey, let's shut that down. And that's kind of talked about in Showdown too.
Nice. Well, Brian, we'll definitely have you back on the show to talk about another song in the future, probably from a different era of the band as well, so we can get some little contrast to our conversation today. But are there any projects of yours in the past or in the future that you would like for listeners to possibly check out?
Yeah. Well, one, Andy from All Else Fails and Counterpunch, and myself, we've worked together before, and we're when I say toying with the idea, it's in the works. It's in the process of being made, but we're trying to figure out how to release our first and only full length from All Else Fails, and do like 11 or 12 of the songs from it. And me and him are gonna basically do everything, have a new drummer, and release the music. Awesome. We believe in the songs. We believe in what we wrote. We just feel that, like, after 20 years of experience on a mental, physical, emotional, musical level, we might be able to do them a little bit more justice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This has been awesome to have you on the Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi. I'll have you back on in the future to talk about a different song. And we're so grateful to you for your time.
Oh, for sure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so that was Brian Phee talking about his love of Propagandhi, his history of learning about the band, why he loves the song Showdown, what it means to him. Keith, what did you think about the episode or the interview with Brian?
What he said about right now evaluating everything and taking time to slow down and appreciate things and look at them and enjoy them in a different way. I think that perhaps makes me want to be more supportive and more, not necessarily blindly complimentary, but just really appreciate the art and the culture and, all of the positive things that I have in my life that helps me kind of figure out this really unusual, uncertain time. I do want to talk about like his explanation too, with the two different parts maybe kind of butting heads. And I think that that's definitely a pretty solid interpretation. What do you think? What stood out to you, Greg?
Well, Brian and I have known each other for a long time. I met him when he was playing guitar for Break the Silence back in 2004 when their record Near Life Experience came out, and they were on tour with the Wilhelm Scream and much the same. And it was a great tour, and I've liked hanging out with Brian for a long time. And I love Brian's energy. Brian always has a lot of really positive energy to say about the art that he loves. And I have vivid memories of like driving around with Brian, just jamming in his car in Chicago. And there's nothing like driving around Chicago on a summer day, listening to insanely loud heavy metal music. So anyway, that was just so cool to have Brian on the show to talk about his song and the song Showdown. And I like that he likes this song and that he picked this song, because I needed Brian and his positivity to help me come around to see this song in a new way, because I've never felt positively towards this song in particular. So having Brian tell me why he likes this song in particular is really helpful for me to always expand my own point of view with regards to art, because it's really easy for non-artists to poo-poo and to talk down on other people's work. And I don't think that the band Propagandhi would particularly say that this is one of their best songs, but having Brian say why it was important to him was really cool for me, because it helped me, not just like hate spiral on this song. Do you know what I mean?
I think this is going to temper my critique and temper some of my criticisms of this track as well.
Okay, so Keith, let's dive into the progression, the lyrics, the personal connections, and the staying power or legacy of this song. What are some of your initial thoughts you got here for me?
So I'm a huge Mystery Science Theater 3000 fan. Like my
Nice.
wife and I watch this all the time. And they have this thing pretty frequently where older movies would take a failed TV show and take two separate episodes with separate stories and even different characters, and they'd smash them together after the TV show pilot failed, to try to rebrand it as a movie. And I can't help but think that these are two different episodes. Like these are two separate songs smashed together to make a full length song. Like, I don't know if everything really fits together.
Yeah. This was a hard listen for me. And, whenever I was listening to this song, I could not reconcile the Chris parts and the John K. Samson parts. I think there are positives about both parts of the song, but to me, these are two totally different songs. So one of the things that I did when I was preparing for this episode is I actually dropped the MP3 of this song into GarageBand, and I cut out all the John parts and I cut out all the Chris parts with all the musical interludes, and I reorganized them into two songs that are about 2 minutes and 10 seconds each. When you break apart a 3 minute and 47-second song that feels like two songs in one, and you keep the musical connections and you just piece them together like a puzzle, you can create two totally distinct songs out of this one song. And so when I listened to it as a standalone Chris song and then as a standalone John song, it made so much more sense to me. And that's how I've been listening to this song for most of the day today, is as two completely different songs.
Yeah, I think what Brian said about like these 2 points, like these two perspectives facing off to see if it is in fact who has the better lyrics. Maybe these, I kind of saw it as like different struggles, like these different forces of at work in the band. Chris being very obviously politically and socially driven, pushing outward toward action and activism. John K. Samson's introspection and emotional lyrics about a relationship. So different types of struggles that people were going through. And I think it's perhaps taking a risk, but I don't know if it's necessarily successful, because I don't know if that's the actual explanation or not.
Yeah, and when I was thinking about this as well, and this song that I see as two songs,
Mhm.
I see the song Showdown as being these two songs within one song as literally showing down against each other.
Yeah.
So I see the Showdown not as just the name of the song, but literally
Right.
John versus Chris. Like I
Yeah.
see John's Greenest Eyes as a standalone song, and I see Chris's Preamble as a standalone song. And so I see the new title as Showdown being literally John against Chris. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Rather than a person against society or a person against some like relationship or partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, this is a really intriguing song if I think about it as a showdown of John versus Chris, because you have Chris Hanna, who has gone on since John left the band to make the records Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, Potemkin City Limits, Supporting Cast, Failed States, Victory Lap. These are incredible records that bear almost no resemblance to How to Clean Everything. I mean, there's almost no similarity of Supporting
Yeah.
Cast to How to Clean Everything. So you have Chris, who took the band in the direction that he envisioned it all along, as being such a huge fan of like Sacrifice and Razor and No Means No and all these bands that he loved. And then you have John, who went on to be the creative force behind the Weaker Thans, which in and of themselves are a monumentally successful Canadian band. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
like this showdown is like, I'm so grateful that these two creative forces, John and Chris, went their own separate ways.
It makes kind of a prediction about the split in the band after Less Talk, More Rock.
How do you feel about this in the collection of songs sung by John Sampson? So you have Gifts, you have Anchorless, you have Leg Hold Trap. How do you see, and then you have Showdown. How do you see this song as being one of the ones that he sang with his tenure in the band?
Yeah, I'll admit I don't really like most of John K. Samson songs, but this one might be higher up in the rankings though. This might actually be my favorite because it's so different from the others. There is this risk, this kind of experimentation to have like the two different sounds or lyrical perspectives from the band kind of facing off. But I think this is one I kind of lean a little bit more positively toward.
Good. I mean, to me, the John portion is super nice, and I agree that it's maybe my favorite John portion of Propagandhi, but I don't say this is my favorite John song because you have the Chris portion as well. So this isn't just a John song.
Yeah.
So if I think about John's songs, I think the Gifts off of Less Talk More Rock might be my favorite. That is straight John. But this one, if you look at Greenest Eyes as a standalone product and you edit it out, you edit Chris out of the song and his vocal parts, this would be my favorite John song of Propagandhi because it has more of that tempo and that pace that I like that Gifts and Anchorless don't have. So another thing that John's lyrics remind me of is like when I lived in Saskatoon. So John's lyrics and his vocals come in and, I don't know if you've ever heard, I don't know if you know anything about Winnipeg, but there's a section in downtown Winnipeg at the intersection of Portage and Main, which is legendary in Canada. And it's supposed to be among the coldest and windiest spots in all of Canada. And Propagandhi being from Winnipeg, John sings the song, "Waking up each morning with confusion in my eyes, the wind is biting through to wave hello." And so he sings that of the wind, like waking him up while he's like in this early morning funk. And it reminds me of a Canadian morning whenever it's so cold that it feels like my eyeballs are about to freeze inside my head.
It's very visual. I think the lyrics, I definitely prefer his lines in the song. They're poetic. I get mental images, and even if it's not a style of punk or emo that I am drawn toward, it's really well done.
Yeah, how do you feel about Chris's portion of the song?
I have to say, I kind of hate the vocals.
Mm.
I listened to, I never bought the remastered version. So I listened to my CD that is like the original, the original recording. And I pulled up the remastered version. And while I thought it sounds a little better, it didn't do enough for me to completely change it. But I prefer, because of that, not liking Chris's section and his vocals, I definitely prefer John K. Samson's.
Yeah, and like that's a tough thing to admit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
To
right.
talk about your favorite band in a way that you're like, I truly don't like this spot. Talking about people that you look up to immensely.
And I know he talks in the podcast about not knowing what he was doing
Mm-hmm.
vocally and just kind of getting out there and singing and maybe thinking he was doing what he wanted to, and then hearing it now, not being exactly happy with the final product. But I got to say that I never asked to be a citizen. That kind of sends me into a full body shudder.
Yeah, you
that's
just
hard
kind
for
of
me
go,
to hear.
oh.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Sorry, Chris.
He says the citizen, and that part is really hard, where he like really lays into that citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about the music? Because it's kind of a banger.
Yeah, I think so. If the lyrics kind of contrast, and if they don't really fit together, even if that's what they were hoping for, I think musically it's really competent. I don't get exactly the emotional political contrast, but the song itself doesn't feel like two separate, disparate, like juxtaposed ideas. It kicks off with a really interesting kind of minimalist intro with just that bass thumping and the drum filling in most of the sound. No guitar yet. It kind of jumps into a catchy verse. And for me, I think it, like, musically, it's aged better than a lot of the other parts or songs in the album. And I think there's a really fun and memorable bridge. And the music works under both singers. I just don't think the singers and the lyrics work well together.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm really shocked that everybody involved in this project allowed this song to remain the way it was on the final record. I'd really love to know what Fat Mike's thoughts were, because I know he was the producer on the sessions. I'm really curious to know what Donnell Cameron, who recorded the sessions, thought of this. I'm really curious to know about Chris and John's thought process on how they kept these two very, very distinct ideas as one song. And maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe there's just something that I'm entirely missing here, where some super fan is going to write and say, you morons, you forgot to say XYZ, which I'm totally happy to admit that I very well may have missed the point.
Let us know for sure. I think ultimately the fact that they took this risk and making a song that is unique in this way, other bands might have leaned on this a little bit more. And I could see a lot of other bands doing this to the point of gimmick. So I think, while I don't have a ton of positive things to say, musically and lyrically, it's a little bit of a breather. The song provides a little bit of a breather, like a pause, because you're hit over the head with so many musical and lyrical ideas in the first part, the first three tracks. And then this one kind of allows you to kind of take a break a little bit. You know, the music isn't as intense. And while the other breather songs on the album, whether that's Ska Sucks or maybe are a little too goofy and, comical, then this still being a serious track.
Yeah. Well, and I was also thinking about some of the other lyrics as well. And I went to Propagandhi's website, and I looked at the lyrics on the website, and I saw that on the website, the lyrics read, "We spoke our minds too clearly. We assumed fundamental rights were inherent, not as pawns, but humans." And they have humans spelled as HUMYNZ. So like the word men is taken out of humans. But in the song, it's sung differently. So the lyrics on the website are a more complete thought. On the song, it's sung as spoke our minds clearly, assumed fundamental rights, inherent not as pawns, but men.
Right.
So the song is sung as men, but on the lyrics on the website of propagandhi.com today, it's men is replaced with humans, that is degendered, ungendered. And so, like, I was listening to Chris's podcast episode a little bit about Haile Selassie earlier today. And I love his show because he is so reflective on it. And I think that Chris probably dislikes these lyrics quite a lot. If I had to make a prediction, I would say that his he might have gone to the trouble to alter them on the website to reflect who he is now. And he mentions that he actually screams this on his podcast. He's like, this album is on my permanent record, and he screams it, and then he like swears a bunch, and it's really a comedic moment. But this is probably one of those moments where he's like, I can't believe this is on my permanent record.
It kind of has that connection with thinking about, the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And now kind of revising that and thinking about that differently, and trying to look back and see how inclusive and how supportive those early lyrics were or weren't.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as you and I are both history and social studies English teachers, there's a really interesting moment in this song as well. I know this is a teachable moment for you, where Chris sings, I never have, I never will pledge allegiance. What does this particular line mean to you as a teacher in the United States today?
Yeah, so there's a teacher I follow named Tim Smith from Pennsylvania who uses graphic novels and comic books in his classroom. And I remember a few years ago, he posted something on Twitter saying that, on day one of the school year, he's not going over his agenda, his rules, his procedures. He wants to hook the students right away. So what I've been doing after seeing that every year, since we start the day, the very first thing we do collectively in a public school in Indiana is say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's said over the intercom. Students, stand and recite it if they want. And I kind of start off class by asking them what they know about it, if they are able to sit, if it's okay to not participate in the pledge, whether they know about the history. So we get into some pretty in-depth document analysis, from Supreme Court cases to newspaper articles to reading about the history of the guy who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, Francis Bellamy, who was a Christian socialist who wrote it for a magazine company in hopes of selling flags to schools.
Wow.
And students don't know this, and they don't know that in a public school, they can't be forced to stand. So my goal early on in the year is to teach them more in depth about something that is just wallpaper in their life. They don't really know what it is or what it means. And we expect students to say and memorize, but we don't really expect them to know the meaning or the context. And teachers have said, well, now that they know they can sit, they just will. And I can't help but think, like, is that different from thinking, like, saying it because they think they have to?
Mm-hmm.
So in doing so, just hoping that this will provide a different look at history, that it's not just dates, right? It's not just like learning about some general in a battle, but learning about history is like the context of their lives now, and it's debates that we're having right now.
Yeah, and it also helps them to learn that they have the ability to decide for themselves what they want, what kind of things they want to do in the world and what they truly believe in. Because if you think about the terms pledge, what is a pledge? What does it mean to pledge something? Also, you think about the term allegiance. What does that term mean? What does it mean to be allegiant to something? And those are questions that I was never asked.
Yeah.
Those were lessons that I never was taught. And so this song that I heard in 1998 for the first time as an 8th grader who had been in public school saying the Pledge of Allegiance since I was 5 every single day, I had no idea what the term allegiance even meant.
Right.
Because no one ever told me. I was like that dense. I had the words in the brain thoughtlessly. I had no idea what the vocabulary meant. And I would just say it every day. So when I heard this song, I never have, I never will pledge allegiance. It was literally the first time I ever was exposed to the idea that that is even an option.
Yeah.
You know? And I was a teacher at a public high school in Missouri. And I got that job in 2013. And I was teaching 10th grade and 12th grade throughout my 5 years at that school. And from 2013 to 2015, we didn't say the pledge at all because it was not a law that said that we had to.
Yeah.
So we didn't. However, in like 2015, 2016, the state of Missouri passed a new piece of legislation that then began requiring that we say it in all schools again. So all of a sudden, I'm a teacher in a 10th and a 12th grade class, and we had an A-B day block schedule. And one day I'd have the 10th graders, the next day I'd have the 12th graders. And like, it was such an interesting experience to go from never saying the pledge for years to then saying it again every day because we were legally mandated to do so.
Did your school like address that? Did you talk about why starting this new procedure in the day?
I told my students that a new law was passed and that as a state employee, this was how I was starting the day now.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting to watch who would stand, who wouldn't stand, who would stand, how people who did stand would react to the people who didn't stand. Right. And I don't want to get a whole lot into the demographics of who did and didn't stand. But it was a powerful lesson for me as a teacher. And, you know, what do you do when you're the person in charge in the room and all of a sudden there's this, and you're a state employee as a public school teacher, and then all of a sudden you're being asked to do this thing that a lot of the students didn't want to do. And the way that I would handle it is I began standing at the front of the room facing the board underneath the flag, like inches from the wall. So with my back to the students so that I had no idea who was and was not standing.
So they wouldn't feel maybe judged or either expected one way or another.
Yeah. And I never heard anybody, when I started doing that, I told them that this is a private decision for you, and I'm going to stand at the front of the room and you can do whatever you want. And that is not my place. There will be no judgment from me, and I expect there to be no judgment among yourselves as well. And I never had a problem, but it got a lot more comfortable for me during the pledge whenever I would stand at the very front of the room, facing the board under the flag, where I couldn't see a single student from my vantage point.
Yeah, we discussed it. We didn't debate. I don't necessarily like debate too often because it's more about who's right rather than different perspectives. And we discussed what it meant to participate and what it meant to not. And interesting, like most students basically said that they thought that if you were not going to participate, you should have a reason. And my only caveat with that was always for students to be aware to know that they didn't have to have one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that a reason to not to is if you don't know what the word allegiance means.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like whenever I was a 7th grader, if I wasn't such a dummy, if I had said to somebody, what does allegiance mean? Sure. I never did because no one else was asking questions like that. and I didn't know. So like, I just never knew. But I think that now a really valid reason to not do it is if you don't know what the terms are. So that's just me.
I mean, I could define the word now, but even as a 36-year-old, I don't know if I really know what it means.
It's a heavy word. And like, I know that Chris in Propagandhi, like I know one of his parents was military in Canada and that he grew up on an Air Force base. So these types of things are deeply embedded in his own youth as well, of being raised in a particular viewpoint system. And maybe he did or didn't have the opportunities to think about those ideas of what does allegiance mean whenever he was a certain age as well. So I was thinking about my own life in relation to my growing up and his growing up, and thinking like, I wonder if he ever had when he started having the opportunity to think about, do I even know what this means and what this means to do something like that? And it this to me, that line is like a really nice foreshadowing to the song Dear Coach's Corner, which came out later on supporting cast, with the soldiers rappelling down in front of the flags inside the sports arena. So there's a lot of threads that are woven throughout Propagandhi's music over the years. So this is one of the things that we'll come back to. That's
a great connection.
Yeah. So Keith, maybe we should just go ahead and rate this thing. What do you think?
I'm gonna, because it's kind of like two songs, I'm gonna give maybe two ratings. I'm gonna give one lyrically and one musically. Lyrically, I'm gonna say a 2. I think Samson's lyrics are far more interesting and well done. I think Chris has some important things to say here, but he's kind of telling the listener rather than showing the listener. So if the purpose is to talk about injustice and inequality and not conforming to systems of power, he's literally saying like, I'm not going to conform to your system of power, rather than doing so in an interesting, parable or in an analogy or in a story. And I think being just a young kid, he doesn't have those writing chops yet. Yeah. So I that's where I kind of dock it there. So I'm going to say lyrically a 2, musically a 3, because I do think it is musically a really well written, well performed, unique track that if the lyrics were either cohesive or if they were a little different, I think this would be one of my favorite songs on the album.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if they had just given this entire song to John to just do his poetic song about love and like watching somebody walk away and chasing them anyway, even though they wanted to walk away, and just really diving into that a little more deeply, I would give this song a higher rating. I'm going to give it a 1.5 out of 5 as far as Propagandhi songs, and I'm not going to give it a 1 because I know that there are many songs that I like less than this song.
Okay.
So I just think that it's got too much of a split personality for me, so I'm going to go with a 1.5 as my standard score, and I'm not going to differentiate the music and the music like you did. I'm just going to go 1.5.
So when you split the two tracks earlier, you prefer the John K. Samson version?
I do, yeah. I think that John did a really nice job, and if this was just a John song, this would be my favorite John song in the Propagandhi records that he performs and sings on. But since it's got this dual personality showdown going, where it's two songs in one, I'm going to go with 1.5. I wish it was just a John song because it probably would have been more of a 2.5.
Song for all of those who shot and missed.
Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi, is created, hosted, and produced by Keith Goff and Greg Soden. Musical clips on the show are composed and performed by Propagandhi. Artwork for the show is by Justin Santora, who can be reached at justinsantora.com. You can find us on Twitter at PropagandhiPod and on Instagram at PropagandhiPod. If you like the show, please drop a rating on your podcast app of choice and subscribe to receive future episodes. Tell your friends. Thank you so much for listening.